Everything seemed fine, or at least it had until that Tuesday afternoon when I found the first strand of dark hair. It was the kind of day that was perfectly ordinary. Work had been hectic, Sarah was still at the hospital, and I came home just wanting to relax. Our bed, which had always been a comfort, seemed to welcome me as I sat down to take a breath. But as I pulled the comforter back, ready to settle in, something caught my eye. A single, long, dark strand of hair, contrasting sharply against the white pillowcase. At first, I didn't even process what it meant. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just something that clung to Sarah's clothes. After all, she worked at the hospital. It wasn't unusual for her to come into contact with different people every day. A patient, a colleague, someone she might have helped, it could have come from anyone. I picked up the hair, holding it between my thumb and forefinger. The texture was unfamiliar, and it was significantly longer than my own short blonde hair or Sarah's. That's when the first seed of doubt was planted in my mind. Still, I didn't want to make too much of it. After all, it was just one strand of hair. I tossed it into the trash and continued with my evening, trying not to let my mind wander too much. But the thought lingered, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. I found myself glancing back at the pillow as though expecting more evidence to appear. Sarah came home later that evening, looking as exhausted as she usually did after her long shifts. I watched her closely, trying to detect something in her behavior, but she seemed normal. She smiled at me when she walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and went straight to the kitchen to grab something to eat. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though the discovery of that hair still sat heavy in the back of my mind. She sighed, pulling off her shoes and slumping into a chair. "Long. Another shift of back-to-back patients. It feels like it's never going to slow down." I nodded, watching her carefully. Nothing seemed off. She looked like the same Sarah I had known for over a decade. We ate dinner in silence, as we often did after long days. Everything about the evening felt routine. But that hair, it was like a little itch I couldn't scratch. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The following week passed uneventfully. Sarah was still working late most nights, and I was tied up with meetings at work. I tried to push the strange incident out of my head, telling myself I was overreacting. After all, Sarah and I had always had a solid relationship. We trusted each other. She'd never given me any reason to doubt her. But then, it happened again. It was late on a Friday night. I had gone upstairs to get ready for bed while Sarah was still finishing up in the kitchen. As I pulled the sheets back, there it was, another strand of long, dark hair, lying across her pillow like a silent accusation. This time, my heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be a coincidence. Finding one hair was easy enough to explain away, but two in the span of a week. It didn't make sense. Not unless someone had been here. I stood frozen, staring at the hair, my mind racing. There had to be some explanation. Maybe Sarah really had just come into contact with someone else. Maybe she had brushed against a colleague, and it had transferred. But this didn't sit right with me. I knew Sarah's habits, knew her routines. And this was different. As I stood there, the realization began to creep in, slow and unwelcome. Was it possible that Sarah was seeing someone else? The thought hit me like a freight train, and I immediately rejected it. No. That couldn't be it. Sarah wasn't like that. She wouldn't cheat. But then, why couldn't I shake the feeling that something was wrong? I picked up the hair, just like I had the first time, and stared at it for what felt like forever. There was no explanation that made sense. Not one that didn't involve her stepping outside our marriage. I threw the hair away and went downstairs, trying to act normal. Sarah was sitting at the dining table, her phone in her hand, smiling at something on the screen. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes bright and warm like they always were. "Ready for bed?" she asked, standing and stretching her arms. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile. I'm pretty tired. I watched her closely as she walked past me, her phone still in her hand. She didn't seem any different. There was no hint of guilt, no sign that she was hiding something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning the events over and over in my head, trying to find a rational explanation, but nothing added up. Sarah's breathing was steady beside me, but I felt miles away from her. What if I was right? What if she really was seeing someone else? A few days passed, and I tried to move on, telling myself it was all in my head. But every time I saw her, every time we shared a meal, there was a part of me that couldn't stop questioning everything. Was she texting him when she smiled at her phone? Was she really working late, or was she with someone else? The doubt began to eat away at me. One night, after she had gone to bed early, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. My mind was spinning. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know the truth. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Jack. He was an old friend of mine, a private investigator, and I knew he could help. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was Jack. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the call button. My hands felt clammy, and my heart raced. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to investigate my own wife? But I had to know. I couldn't live with the doubt any longer. Jack picked up after the second ring. Ethan. Hey, man, it's been a while. What's up? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Hey, Jack. I need your help with something. It's personal. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jack wasn't the type to pry, but he could always tell when something was wrong. What's going on? He asked, his tone serious now. I think Sarah might be cheating on me, I said, the words feeling foreign and heavy as they left my mouth. Jack was quiet for a moment before he responded. You sure about that? No, I admitted, rubbing my forehead in frustration. That's the thing. I don't know for sure. But I've been finding things, hair. Stuff that doesn't add up. I just need to know the truth. Okay, Jack said. I'll help you. I can start following her, checking up on things. But Ethan, are you sure this is what you want? Once we start, there's no going back. I hesitated, thinking about what this would mean. If Jack found something, if he confirmed my worst fears, there would be no undoing it. But I had to know. Yeah, I said finally. I need to know. For the next week, I waited in agony, trying to act normal around Sarah while Jack conducted his investigation. Every time she left for work, every time she came home late, I wondered where she had really been. I watched her more closely than ever, studying every little thing she did, every word she said. But Sarah remained the same. She smiled, laughed, told me about her day at the hospital, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. If she was hiding something, she was doing a damn good job of it. Jack checked in with me every few days, letting me know how the investigation was going. So far, he hadn't found anything unusual. Sarah's routine seemed normal, work, errands, the occasional visit to a friend's house. But Jack wasn't giving up, and neither was I. I knew there was more going on, and I just needed to be patient. One evening, as Sarah was getting ready for bed, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. She was texting someone, her phone held close to her chest as she typed quickly. Normally, I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but something about the way she was hiding the screen from me made my stomach twist. Who are you texting? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She looked up, her eyes wide for a split second before she smiled. Oh, just Linda. She's planning a girls' night this weekend. I nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt the doubt clawing at me. Was it really Linda she was texting, or was it someone else? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep pretending everything was fine. Weeks passed, and I found myself sinking deeper into a world of doubts and uncertainty. What had started as a single dark hair on the pillow had grown into an ever-present feeling of dread. Every time I saw Sarah look at her phone or smile while texting, a chill ran down my spine. Every late night at work or girls' night out felt like an excuse for something else, something I wasn't seeing but could feel. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was letting the anxiety take control, seeing things that weren't really there. But then I remembered those moments, the strands of hair, the feeling that Sarah was hiding something, her subtle changes in behavior. And every time I thought about it, I became more certain that something was terribly wrong. Calls from Jack were the only thing keeping me grounded. He was my lifeline, my only connection to the truth. Every few days, he would update me on his investigation, but so far, there was little to report. So far, nothing suspicious, Ethan, he would say. She seems to be following her usual routine, work, errands, the occasional meet-up with friends. But those words did nothing to calm me. I knew something was happening beneath the surface, something that I couldn't see but could feel gnawing at my gut. One evening, after another one of Jack's calls, I did something I'd never thought I would do. I decided to check Sarah's phone. I hated the idea. It felt invasive, wrong. But the doubt had eaten away at me for so long that I couldn't ignore it any longer. That night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to take a shower. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing I was about to cross a line. I picked up the phone. We never had passwords or locks on our devices, there was always trust between us. But now, that trust felt fragile, hanging by a thread. I started by scrolling through her text messages. There was nothing unusual. Conversations with friends, messages from coworkers, nothing that stood out. My hands were shaking, but I kept going, refusing to give up. Then I opened the call log, and that's when I saw it. There was a number that had appeared several times over the past few weeks. No name attached to it, just a string of digits. The same number had called her multiple times, and she had called it back more than once. I didn't recognize it. I quickly scribbled down the number on a piece of paper, put the phone back exactly as I'd found it, and sat down, trying to act normal. When Sarah came downstairs, she smiled at me, oblivious to what I had just done. She had no idea that my heart was racing, my mind spinning with suspicion. "Ready for bed?" she asked, stretching with a casual yawn. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm pretty tired." I watched her closely, every movement, every expression, wondering if she had any idea what I was thinking. But she just walked past me, her phone in hand, as if nothing was wrong. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't get that phone number out of my mind. Who was she talking to? Was it just a friend? A coworker? Or was it something more? The doubt gnawed at me until I couldn't take it any longer. The next morning, I sent the number to Jack. "Can you check out this number for me?" I typed. His response was quick. "Sure, I'll dig into it." A few days later, Jack called me. His voice was calm, but I could sense a seriousness in his tone that wasn't usually there. "Ethan, I looked into that number you sent me," he said. "It belongs to a guy named Alex Marshall. He works in finance. Lives a few blocks from your place. And, this isn't the first time I've heard about him." My heart dropped. I could barely breathe, gripping the phone tightly in my hand. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Alex, he's got a bit of a reputation. He's been involved with a few married women in the past. Based on what I've found, this could be another one of those situations." I felt the world shift beneath me. The air felt thick and heavy, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. How could this be happening? How could Sarah, my wife, be mixed up with someone like that? Jack, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper as I struggled to keep control. What should I do? Stay calm, Jack said firmly. You don't want to confront her without solid proof. If you're going to make a move, you need to have everything in place. I'll keep watching her, see if anything else comes up. But Ethan, be careful. Once you go down this road, there's no turning back. I closed my eyes, my mind spinning. Every fiber of my being wanted to act. I wanted to confront Sarah, to scream at her, demand answers, or go straight to Alex's house and tear him apart. But Jack was right. I couldn't lose control. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed every piece of evidence before I did anything. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Thanks, Jack. Let me know what you find. The next few days were unbearable. I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but every time I looked at Sarah, I couldn't stop the wave of anger that rolled through me. Each time she left for work or told me she was meeting friends, I wondered if it was just another excuse to be with him. I became hypervigilant, watching her every move, listening for any clue that might confirm my suspicions. I found myself glancing at her phone when she left it unattended, searching for more proof, more evidence. But her texts were clean, no trace of Alex, no trace of anything incriminating. That only made me more suspicious. She was being careful. Too careful. And that meant she was hiding something. One evening, she told me she was going to have dinner with her friends. The moment she left, I made a decision. I grabbed my jacket, got into my car, and followed her. My heart raced the entire time, the pulse of adrenaline pushing me to the edge as I drove a safe distance behind her. She didn't head in the direction I expected. Instead, she took a turn that led toward a part of town where Alex lived. My stomach churned. She wasn't going to meet friends. She was going to meet him. I kept my distance, watching as she pulled into a small cafe parking lot. She got out, looking around casually before heading inside. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I pulled into a spot farther down the street, my eyes fixed on the entrance. 20 minutes passed, and then I saw him. Alex. He stepped out of a car a few spots away, looking as smug and polished as Jack had described. He walked into the cafe, and seconds later, Sarah joined him. She smiled up at him as he wrapped his arm around her waist. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into that cafe and drag him out by his collar, demand that Sarah explain everything right there in front of him. But I didn't. I stayed in the car, my heart pounding as I watched them together. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. I had my answer. That night, when Sarah returned home, I could barely look at her. She walked in with the same bright smile, talking about her evening as if everything was perfectly fine. I listened to her lie, watched her move around the kitchen like she had nothing to hide, and it took every ounce of control I had not to explode right then and there. So, how was dinner? I asked, trying to sound casual as I sat at the table. Great, she said, still smiling. It was nice to catch up with the girls. I nodded, forcing a smile in return. But inside, my heart was breaking. She had just spent the evening with him, and now she was standing here, lying to me without a second thought. My wife, the woman I had loved for 10 years, had been betraying me for months. But I didn't say anything that night. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I had to wait. I had to be patient. Because when I finally confronted her, I would have all the evidence. And she wouldn't be able to deny it. Now that I had seen Sarah with Alex, all doubt was gone. I couldn't convince myself otherwise anymore. She was cheating, and it wasn't just a suspicion, it was a fact. But I couldn't act on emotion, not now. I needed to be methodical, precise. If I was going to confront her, I had to have everything laid out. I wanted the truth, and I was going to get it. Jack was my ally in this. He had already found out who Alex was, but that wasn't enough for me. I needed hard proof, concrete evidence that Sarah was betraying me, and I needed it from more than just one encounter. I didn't want her to have any wiggle room when I finally confronted her. I called Jack the morning after I saw them together at the cafe. My voice was calm, but underneath it, I was boiling with anger. I saw them, Jack. Last night. Together. Jack let out a slow sigh on the other end of the line. I figured you might, given what I found out about him. What do you want to do now? I want more, I said firmly. I want undeniable proof. Not just a meeting at a cafe, I need to know everything. How long this has been going on, where they've been meeting, how often. I need to see it all. Jack was quiet for a moment before responding. All right, Ethan. I'll dig deeper. I'll start tailing her, see what else we can find. But this might take some time. Are you ready for that? I clenched my jaw. Time. That was the hardest part, waiting. Knowing that she was still out there, still seeing him, while I pretended nothing was wrong. But I couldn't let impatience ruin everything. I had to be smart. Yeah, Jack. I'm ready. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I had to keep playing my part, acting like everything was fine, like I wasn't suspicious of anything. Every morning, I watched her leave for work, wondering if she was going to meet him later. Every night, when she came home, I wondered what lies she would tell me next. The act was exhausting, and the weight of it was crushing me. Jack kept me updated, but there was still no bombshell revelation, just more small confirmations of what I already knew. He followed her to a few more cafes, caught her texting Alex from her phone, but I needed more. I needed something undeniable, something that would leave no room for argument. Then, one afternoon, Jack called me with a lead. She's meeting him at a hotel this Thursday, Jack said. I've been tracking her movements for the past week. She's scheduled a few work meetings that don't add up. I think they've been using this hotel regularly. The idea of Sarah and Alex in a hotel room together sent a surge of fury through me, but I kept my voice steady. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I'll get it. I'm going to set up surveillance, get photos, videos, everything. If this is the real deal, you'll have all the evidence you need by the end of the week. Thursday. I had until Thursday to prepare myself for what was coming. I knew Jack would find what I needed. He always did. But the thought of seeing those photos, those videos, it made me sick. It was going to destroy me, but I needed to see it for myself. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. Thursday morning, Sarah acted just as she always did. She got up, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she had a busy day ahead at the hospital. Her smile was warm, her eyes bright, but all I could see was the lie. I'll probably be home late, she said casually, grabbing her bag. I've got a few errands to run after work. Okay, I replied, forcing a smile. Take your time. As she walked out the door, I felt a mixture of rage and helplessness wash over me. She was walking out to meet him, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But I wasn't going to stop it. I needed this to happen, needed Jack to get the proof. I spent the day in a daze, barely able to focus on anything. My mind was consumed with images of what was happening at that hotel. I imagined them together, imagined her in his arms, imagined the lies she would tell me when she came home. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jack. It's happening. I'll have everything ready for you by tonight. I stared at the message, my stomach churning. This was it. The moment of truth. Later that evening, Jack called me. His voice was quiet, somber. It's all there, Ethan. I've got photos, videos, the works. Do you want to meet now, or wait until morning. I could barely breathe. I didn't want to see it, but I had to. I couldn't wait another moment, couldn't live another night not knowing. Now, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Let's meet now. We agreed to meet at a small bar on the outskirts of town, somewhere private, away from prying eyes. When I arrived, Jack was already there, sitting at a booth in the corner with a manila envelope in front of him. I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking as I reached for the envelope. You sure about this? Jack asked, his eyes full of concern. Once you see this, there's no going back. I nodded, unable to speak. I wasn't sure. I wasn't ready. But I had to know. I opened the envelope, my fingers trembling as I pulled out the photos. The first one was of Sarah, standing outside the hotel, waiting. She looked nervous, checking her phone, glancing around. Then there was Alex, walking up to her, a smile on his face. They embraced, and she leaned into him, her body language so familiar, so intimate. I felt bile rise in my throat. The next photo was of them walking into the hotel together. Then the final set, taken from inside the hotel's hallway cameras, showed them entering a room. Jack had done his job well. Every angle, every detail was captured. But it wasn't just the photos. Jack had included video clips, too. Footage from the hallway, the parking lot, everything. There was no way to deny it now. No excuses. No lies. Sarah was having an affair, and it had been going on for months. I stared at the photos for a long time, my hands shaking, my chest tight with rage and grief. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought I had, it was all a lie. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning, sinking into a pit of despair that I couldn't escape. Jack sat quietly across from me, waiting for me to process it all. He didn't offer any words of comfort, because there were no words that could make this better. What do you want to do now? He finally asked. I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, trying to figure out my next move. Confronting her. Walking away. Taking legal action. I didn't know. All I knew was that everything had changed. I'm not going to confront her yet, I said, my voice hoarse. Not until I've secured everything. My finances, my business, everything. She's not walking away with half of what I've worked for. Jack nodded, understanding. I can help you with that, too. Make sure everything's locked down before you make a move. I nodded, still staring at the photos. This was it. The end of everything I had built with Sarah. But I wasn't going to let her destroy the rest of my life, too. I wasn't going to let her take what I had worked so hard for. The next few days were a blur of meetings with my lawyer, financial advisors, and Jack. I was methodical in my approach, making sure every asset was protected, every dollar accounted for. Sarah wouldn't see it coming. She thought she was in control, that she had everything figured out. But she didn't know that I was already 3 steps ahead. I kept playing my part, pretending that everything was fine, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every time I looked at her, I felt a surge of anger, but I kept it hidden. I had to. I couldn't let her know that I knew. Jack continued to keep an eye on her, gathering more evidence, just in case. I wanted to be overprepared. I wanted to have everything in place before I finally confronted her. And when the moment came, I would be ready. It had been weeks of planning, and now everything was in place. My assets were protected, my lawyer was ready, and I had enough evidence to make sure Sarah wouldn't be able to walk away with anything more than what was legally hers. Jack continued to follow her, but by now, it was unnecessary. I had everything I needed. All that was left was to confront her, to make her face the truth she had been hiding. It was a Friday evening when I decided it was time. I wanted to confront her on a weekend, so there wouldn't be any reason for her to run out the door, claiming she had work. I needed to make sure she had no escape. Sarah had been acting normal, as she always did, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I watched her move around the house, texting her friends, probably texting him, while pretending everything was fine. It made my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral, the mask I had been wearing for weeks now second nature. We were sitting in the living room after dinner when I finally spoke. "Sarah, we need to talk." She looked up from her phone, her brow furrowing slightly. "Sure, what's up?" There was no turning back now. I stood up, pacing the room for a moment before turning to face her. "I know." Her face remained blank for a second, then a flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. "Know what?" "I know about Alex," I said, my voice cold, steady. "I know everything." The color drained from her face. Her phone slipped from her hand, landing softly on the couch beside her. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if trying to process what I had just said. "Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes. Alex. The man you've been seeing behind my back for months. The man you've been lying to me about. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about." Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic setting in. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I could tell she was scrambling, trying to find a way to explain, to lie her way out of this, but there was no way out. I walked over to the table, where I had laid out the envelope with the evidence. Jack had given me everything: photos, videos, phone records. I slid the envelope toward her. "Here," I said. "In case you were planning to deny it." She stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to go off. Slowly, she reached for it, her fingers trembling as she opened it. The first photo slid out, her and Alex walking into the hotel together. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stammered, her voice breaking. "Ethan, I can explain." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by trying to explain this. There's nothing you can say that will fix this. You lied to me, Sarah. You've been lying to me for months. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? What it feels like to know that the woman I've spent 10 years with has been betraying me like this?" Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head, her lips quivering. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I never meant to hurt you." You never meant to hurt me?" I scoffed, feeling the anger rising again. "You never meant to hurt me, but you did it anyway. Over and over again. Do you even know what it's like to live with that kind of doubt? To wonder every time you leave the house if you're going to see him? I've been watching you for weeks, Sarah. Watching you lie to my face, smiling at me like everything was fine. How could you?" She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. "I'm sorry," she kept saying, over and over again. "I'm so sorry." But her apologies meant nothing to me. Not now. Not after everything. "I trusted you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I trusted you with my life, and you threw it away. For what? For him." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "It wasn't about him. It wasn't." "Then what was it about, Sarah?" I demanded. "Tell me, because I don't understand. We had a good life. A good marriage. And you destroyed it. For what?" She shook her head, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know. I don't know why I did it." "That's not good enough," I said, stepping closer to her. "You don't just get to say you don't know. You made a choice. You chose him. You chose to lie to me, to cheat on me, and now you're going to have to deal with the consequences." She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. But I felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness. Just cold, hard anger. "I've already talked to my lawyer," I said, my voice steady again. The divorce papers are ready. You're not getting anything more than what's legally yours. I've protected my assets. The business, the house, it's all mine. You'll get what's fair, but you're not walking away with half of what I've built. Her sobs quieted then, and she looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. Divorce, she whispered, as if the word was foreign to her. What did you think would happen? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. Did you think we would just sweep this under the rug? That I'd forgive you, and we'd go back to the way things were? No, Sarah. You ended this marriage the moment you stepped into that hotel with him. She shook her head, her hands trembling. No, Ethan, please. I don't want a divorce. We can work through this. I'll end it with Alex. I'll do anything. Just, please, don't do this. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. I had made my decision. There was no going back. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. It's too late, I said firmly. You made your bed, Sarah. Now you have to lie in it. Sarah didn't say much after that. She cried for a while longer, but eventually, the weight of the situation seemed to settle over her, and she fell silent. The reality of what was happening, what she had done, finally hit her. The next morning, I handed her the divorce papers. She stared at them for a long time before signing, her hand shaking as she scribbled her name at the bottom. It was done. Our marriage was over. She packed a bag and left the house that same day. I didn't ask where she was going, and she didn't offer an explanation. It didn't matter. I didn't care anymore. The only thing I felt was relief. Relief that it was finally over. But the relief was short-lived. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt cold and empty. Every room reminded me of what had happened, of the lies, the betrayal. It was unbearable. I called my real estate agent that evening and told him to put the house on the market. I couldn't stay there. I needed a fresh start, somewhere far away from the memories of what Sarah and I had once been. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and legal meetings. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the prenup I had put in place before we got married. Sarah didn't fight me for the business, the house, or the assets. She walked away with what was hers, and I kept everything I had built. But even with the financial security, it didn't feel like a victory. There was no sense of satisfaction, no feeling of triumph. All I felt was an overwhelming emptiness. I had spent years building a life with Sarah, only to watch it crumble before my eyes. In the end, I packed up my things and moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me. I didn't need a big house or fancy things anymore. I just needed space, space to think, to heal, to figure out what my life was going to look like moving forward. I threw myself into work, taking on more clients, more projects. Anything to keep my mind busy, to stop thinking about Sarah and Alex and everything that had happened. But no matter how hard I worked, the memories were always there, lurking in the back of my mind. The first few weeks after Sarah left were strange, almost surreal. I had spent 10 years of my life sharing a home with her, and now, I was alone. The apartment I moved into felt cold and impersonal, but it was what I needed, distance from everything that reminded me of the life I had built with her. I kept telling myself that I had made the right decision, that there was no going back, but that didn't make the silence any easier to bear. Nights were the worst. I would come home from work, exhausted but unable to sleep. I would sit in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, my thoughts racing in circles. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. About everything that had happened. About how she had destroyed our marriage for a man like Alex. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. I was angry, furious even, but there was a part of me that still loved her. The Sarah I had fallen in love with, the woman I had spent a decade of my life with, was still there somewhere in my memory. And that made it harder to move on. Every now and then, I would catch myself thinking about the good times, our wedding day, the trips we took together, the moments of laughter and closeness that had defined the early years of our relationship. But those memories were tainted now, overshadowed by the betrayal. No matter how much I tried to focus on the happy times, they were always followed by the harsh reality of what she had done. But despite the pain, I knew I had to move forward. I couldn't let the past consume me. So I threw myself into work, taking on every project that came my way. My business was thriving, and it was the only thing that gave me any sense of control. At least there, I knew what I was doing. I could set goals, achieve them, and see the results of my efforts. It was a distraction, but it wasn't enough to fill the void that Sarah had left behind. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Sarah. It was bound to happen eventually. We lived in the same town, shared the same social circles. But I wasn't prepared for how it would feel to see her again. I was at the grocery store, minding my own business, when I saw her in one of the aisles. She was standing there, looking at a shelf of cereal, completely unaware that I was just a few feet away. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I considered walking away, pretending I hadn't seen her. But something stopped me. I stood there, watching her for a second longer, taking in the sight of her. She looked different. She seemed smaller, more fragile than I remembered. Maybe it was because I had built her up in my mind as this larger-than-life figure who had torn my world apart, but seeing her like this, just an ordinary person, standing in the grocery store, made her seem less intimidating. She turned and saw me, and I could see the shock register on her face. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, staring at each other across the aisle. "Ethan," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. She took a step toward me, then hesitated. "How have you been?" It was such a simple question, but it felt loaded with a million unspoken things. How had I been? That was a complicated answer. I had been angry, hurt, devastated. But I had also been healing, slowly putting the pieces of my life back together. I didn't owe her an explanation. "I've been fine," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded, glancing down at the floor. "I'm glad to hear that." There was an awkward silence between us, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air. I didn't know what she wanted from me. An apology? Closure? I wasn't sure I had anything left to give her. "Are you happy with him?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer, but then she shook her head. "It's over," she said quietly. "Alex and it didn't work out." I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Part of me felt a grim sense of satisfaction, like she was getting what she deserved. But another part of me just felt empty. I had spent so much time being angry at her for choosing him, and now, it didn't matter. He was gone, just like she was. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "For everything." I didn't know what to say to that. What good did an apology do now? It didn't change anything. It didn't undo the damage that had been done. But I didn't have the energy to argue with her. "I know," I said, and it was the truth. I knew she was sorry. I knew she hadn't meant for things to turn out this way. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to forgive her. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the aisle. There was nothing left to say. After that encounter with Sarah, something shifted in me. It wasn't a dramatic change, there was no moment of epiphany where everything suddenly felt better, but it was a small step toward letting go. Seeing her again had reminded me that she was just a person, flawed and broken like the rest of us. She wasn't the monster I had built up in my mind. She had made mistakes, just like I had. But I didn't need her in my life anymore. I didn't need her apology, her explanations, or her regrets. I just needed to move on. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends I had lost touch with during the marriage. At first, it was awkward, like I didn't quite fit in with the social scene anymore. But eventually, I found my rhythm. I started to enjoy myself again, to feel like a normal person instead of someone defined by the wreckage of a failed marriage. I even started dating again, though it was slow and cautious at first. The idea of letting someone else into my life, of trusting again, felt foreign and uncomfortable. But I knew I couldn't stay closed off forever. I had to give myself a chance to find happiness again, even if it felt risky. The first few dates were awkward, filled with stilted conversation and forced smiles. But eventually, I met someone who made me feel like maybe, just maybe, it was possible to love again. Her name was Emma, and she was different from Sarah in every way. She was kind, patient, and honest, qualities I hadn't realized I had been missing until I found them in her. It's been a year now since I signed those divorce papers. A year since I walked away from the life I had built with Sarah and started over. There are still days when the memories creep in, days when I think about what might have been if things had turned out differently. But those days are fewer now, and they don't hurt as much as they used to. I've learned a lot about myself through all of this. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive things I never imagined facing. I've learned that trust is fragile, but it can be rebuilt, if not with the same person, then with someone new. Sarah is part of my past now, a chapter that's been closed. I don't hate her, but I don't love her either. She made her choices, and I made mine. And now, we're both living with the consequences. Emma and I are still taking things slow, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I feel like I'm moving in the right direction, like there's a future ahead of me that's worth looking forward to. And that's enough for now. As I sit here, writing this, I realize that this is the end of one story and the beginning of another. Life goes on. People change. We rebuild, we grow, and we move forward, even when it feels impossible. And maybe that's the most important lesson I've learned. The past doesn't define us. It's what we do next that matters.